Today we are starting a series of a few videos that will be related to conversations and agents. So we are done with the chat completions for a while and we will explore different capabilities of the API. If you compare with these chat completions, the conversations have two main benefits. The first one is the persistent state. So these conversations are not stateless like the chat completion. When you submit a new message in a conversation, you always receive back a conversation ID to identify which conversation it is part of, and you can use this ID to continue the conversation whenever you want. Very similarly to what we do when we chat with a LLM with a web interface like ChatGPT. So we expect that when we log in again, we can still access the previous conversation and continue them when we want. That's the first benefit. You can also have them stateless, but in that case, it's not very interesting because it's something that you can already do with the chat completion. The second benefit, these are the built-in tools that are provided by Mistral, like web search, code execution, image generation, and a few others, in addition to the functions calling that we did in the previous video. So in that case, if you want to overcome this knowledge cutoff date of the model that you are using, you can easily use web search to look for recent events, for example. And this is a very easy way to do it. You don't need to create your own function to search the web. This is the built-in capability. The only drawback really is that you cannot work with the local models because a lot of these functionalities rely on some code execution server side. So that's why you cannot really do it with some local models on your computer. I will not go too much into the details. What are the agents? I think the most important piece of information for now is that this is an optional piece of reusable configuration for a conversation. So you can use the conversations alone without agents. However, after you define an agent, you need to link it to a conversation to be able to use it. So this is the choice that you have. You can define the different parameters like the model, the instructions, the tools directly in the conversation, but each time you start a new conversation, you need to set those again, or you can save those in some agents and be able to reuse them for further conversations. So if you often end up using the same type of parameters, it may be a good idea to create an agent, and whenever you start a new conversation, you reuse this agent instead of setting these parameters from scratch again. And in the video related to the agent, we will see a few of these benefits. Why using an agent in that case, apart from the reusability. It's also that you will be able to change this configuration mid-conversation. So you can react to some event and change the system prompt, change the tools it has access to, and so on. And you can also have some orchestration of multiple agents with different capabilities, tools, personas, and so on. So these are the main benefits of using an agent compared to using just a conversation alone without an agent. In this first video, we will go through all the details regarding conversation, and we will stop just before using them with tools because it's already quite a big topic. In the second video, we can have a look at the conversation with tools, and in the third video, we will have a look at the agents. So let's start a conversation. And the first thing to do, like chat completion, is to create your client to communicate with the Mistral API. It's still a beta functionality, so after your client, you will have this .beta.conversations.start. And to start a new conversation, you need to define the model. It's very similar to the chat completion, so I will use Mistral small latest as usual. The instructions are optional. This is like a system prompt. So here I will start again telling my model that it is acting like a senior Python developer. And the inputs are the equivalent to the messages in the chat completion. You can either pass a single string, and it will know that this is the user role automatically. Alternatively, you can still pass a list of messages. However, you cannot use the classes that we had for chat completions like assistant message, user message, and so on. So you need to pass these dictionaries where you define the role and the content, or you need to find some other classes, but it gets a bit complicated. I execute this one, and it will do two things at the same time. It will first create a conversation, which is a model conversation object. And in this one, this is really just saving the configuration of the conversation. So it will remember what was the model, the instructions, potentially the tools that we attached. And it will also provide a conversation ID, so we can uniquely identify this conversation when we want to communicate with it. However, this model conversation does not contain any of the messages that are part of this conversation. Additionally, what is returned by this method in the variable, this is a conversation response. And this is what we can see here when I execute it. So we see this is a conversation response object, and it contains this conversation ID. So this is the way with this ID that you can link, for example, this response to the model conversation object if you need to. Additionally, what is interesting for us are the outputs. And I wrote this is similar to the choices in the chat completion. So within output, you will get a list of different type of content that you can read. So let's have a look, and we execute. So the response.outputs, as we said, there is a list, and here there is a single object so far, which is called the message output entry. And this is similar to the assistant message in the chat completion. So in that case, this message output entry has some content, and this is the response to my question. So quite simple so far. We just need to get used to some different terminology. It's also possible to check from your client and still beta conversation the list of all the conversations which are stored on the server at the moment. I think I cleaned everything before this video, so now there is a single conversation. And when we progress through this notebook, there should be a few other that add up. So here you can see that so far I've got a single conversation which is stored on the server, and the ID, of course, is the one that we have already seen. If you want, if you have this ID, you can also query a specific conversation. And in that case, you can use mistral.beta.conversation, and instead of list, you use the get method. And you see that here, you need to provide the conversation ID. In that case, I will reuse the one that I got from my response. So in response.conversation ID, I know that this is the ID of the conversation I want to retrieve. And that's what I'm doing here. So if I execute, now it retrieves my model conversation. And finally, we said that this model conversation does not store the messages. You can access them, however, with a different method. So mistral.beta.conversation, and this time you use .getMessages. And you still need to provide the conversation ID so it knows which conversation are you interested in. And if I do so, we can see conversation messages, it's a special object. And then within messages, I will get a list of all the messages that are stored for this conversation. Let's have a look a bit more closely. So if I go to all messages, dot messages, we can see that we have message input entry and message output entry. So we have already seen the message output entry that was part of the response. So that this is, and we said that it's similar to the assistant message in chat completion. Here it also saves my original query. So this is similar to the user message in that case. And this is called here in this module message input entry. So quite easy. Input is from the user, output is from the assistant or from the model. Let's continue an existing conversation. So far, what did we ask already? How can I reverse a Python list? So we expect that if we continue a conversation, it will know the context of the previous question, and I can ask some follow-up. So as what we did in the previous video, I will ask how I can sort it now. So this is how we can check if it has access to the previous messages to know that I'm still talking about the Python list. So if you want to continue a conversation, this time you are using append method. So still mistral.beta.conversations, this time .append, and you can still save it in a response variable. You need, of course, to provide a conversation ID so it knows which conversation you want to continue. And inputs, again, you can provide a list of messages, but this time you don't need to provide the entire history. This is the main benefit compared to chat completions, because as we said, this is a persistent memory already. So in that case, I can just provide again a string with my new question, and it will return again a conversation response in return. Similarly to before, we get conversation ID, but this is the same as before because we are still working on the same conversation. And then there are still some outputs and still a single message inside, which is the response to my question. And if I want, I can display it. So remember in chat completion, we had to do dot choices, index 0, dot message dot content. Here, this is dot output at index 0, and directly the content. And if I scroll a bit up here, this is what we executed, and we see that this is quite a long response from the LLM, already nicely formatted with everything I need to know how to sort a Python list. This part, how to query entries and messages. So we have already seen how you can get all the messages for a given conversation. What I wanted to explain here, this is the terminology that they use for this API endpoint. So sometimes you are dealing with messages and sometimes you are dealing with entries. So messages, you are already used to them. You have these input messages, output messages. This is really what we ask to the model and what we get in return, the responses. Entries, this is a larger concept. It includes all the messages, but it will also include whatever is tool related when we start working with the tools. So if it automatically executed some tools for the pre-built tools from Mistral, we will get this object, tool execution entry. Or if we are dealing with the functions calling, we will get both some function call entry. This is similar to the tool calls. And after we execute them and we save them to the conversation, we will also deal with some function result entry, which is similar to the tool messages that we saved in the memory in the previous video. So entries, it's really everything in the conversation. Messages, it's really just the user and the assistant having these input-output messages. So I can display it again with the conversation ID that we were dealing with. And here, all messages, maybe it's easier if we go, that's just under, specifically to the messages, we can see input, output, input, output. So that was my first question. How can I reverse a Python list? The response from the model, my follow-up question, and how to sort it, and the new response from the model. So messages are quite easy to understand. In our case, entries will be similar at the beginning because we haven't executed any tools so far. So here we get a conversation history object, and here within entries, we could see all type of entries. So let's try to have a look. And we see exactly the same. So message input, message output, message input, message output. So no differences so far. However, when we start dealing with the tools, you will see additional messages that are similar to the tool calls and the tool messages. And finally, there is an option to restart a conversation from a specific entry. The only condition, and this is written in the documentation, is that you need to have already used the append method at least one time. So we have already done so because we asked the first question and later we ask a second one with the append method. So it means that we will be able to restart the conversation from this specific entry. In addition to the conversation ID that you provide when you append to a conversation, this time you also need to identify the entry from which you want to restart the conversation. And this is what you can find here in allentries.entries. So if I check this second one that I want to start from, and I will scroll completely to the right, we will find that there is an ID here that identifies uniquely, this time not the conversation, but the message within the conversation. So this is what we want to extract. So here, allentries.entries, this is what we see here. Index 1 means the second message. So just as a reminder, if you are getting started with Python, so when you have a list, the first message is index 0, second one is index 1, 2, 3, and so on. So this is 0 based. So if I want to identify the second item in my list, this is the index 1. And from this message, I want to extract the ID. After that, input, this is like when you append, you can just provide a string with the new question that you've got. Here I extracted what is currently my conversation ID because originally when I recorded this video, I made a mistake in this part of the code. So I had to rerun the notebook, and I just wanted to let you know that actually the conversation ID that you see here, this is the current one, not the one that you see actually at the beginning of the video, but it still refers to the same conversation. I just had to rerun it a second time. So now, new response. And we can see a new conversation response. And what you see here is that it actually returned a new ID. So this one, this conversation ID, is not the one that I've got so far. And this is what we can check here, even if this is very obvious visually, which means that when you are restarting the conversation from a specific point, actually, it is creating a new conversation. And let's have a look what is included in this one. So I'm using again get messages, but this time I provide the conversation ID, of course, of this new response. So I don't want to see the previous conversation, I want to see the new one. And you see that it starts with the same question that I started the first conversation with, and I still have this response from the model. However, after that, it is not asking how to sort it. It is now writing this new prompt that I just provided now when I restarted the conversation, and a new response from the model, which means that actually you are keeping everything up to the point that you define in the method, so up to this index 1 included, and after that there will be your new question and a new response from the model. So this is quite an interesting functionality, especially if you want to explore different scenarios. So sometimes you may want to restart from a specific point in the conversation and try with different prompt and see how it reacts differently. And the last thing we can do, especially if you want to start over and over practicing, it can be a good idea to delete all your conversations so you don't end up with too many. So if I list now, I should have 2 conversations. Actually a bit more because I tried a few times before, but we should identify at least these 2 conversations that we were dealing with. So here, the new one, when I started the conversation, is the one ending E76, and we can see this is the one on top, so the very first one, the very last one that was created. And the one that I had previously for most of this notebook, the 4E0A, is the one just under. And then these are all my trials before I recorded this section again. So if you want to delete, you can just loop through all your conversation. So still with this list method, and then you can use .beta.conversations and this time the delete method. And you also need to provide your conversation ID to identify which ID you want, which conversation specifically you want to delete. In that case, in the loop, we are deleting them one by one. And now we can check again how many conversations we have served on the server. And there are none. And in that case, I see you in the next video that will be related to conversations, but this time with tool execution. I see you in the next one. Bye-bye.